The African savannah, where the wind moves slowly as if carrying secrets older than time itself, witnesses a moment unlike any other. Amidst the vast golden plains, where the sun scorches the earth, an elderly woman is abandoned in her wheelchair, forgotten and alone. But the savannah is not a place of mercy. Here, nature's cruelest creatures are about to show a gentler side, a side that defies everything humanity knows about kindness. In the quiet heat of that unforgiving afternoon, an unexpected protector will arise, and the life of one old woman will be touched by the most extraordinary of miracles. This is the story of a powerful bond that no one saw coming between the fragile and the fierce. Helen had lived a life full of both joy and sorrow, but no one could prepare her for the emptiness that came with growing old. Alzheimer's had gradually stolen her memories, erasing the faces of loved ones, the places she had visited, and the things she once held dear. At 78, her mind was often a fog, but she still recognized some things, like the heat of the African sun on her face, and the odd feeling that she was somewhere she shouldn't be. She had been on a safari with her daughter-in-law, Claire, but something went wrong. The trip, once filled with excitement, had turned into a nightmare. Claire, who never quite smiled at her, had left her behind, abandoned her in the desolate expanse of the savannah. The jeep had driven off without a second glance. Now, as Helen sat alone, feeling the weight of the loneliness settle over her, she realized she had no way to escape. The scorching sun and the vast emptiness only heightened her sense of being forgotten, as if the world itself had moved on, leaving her behind. But the savannah does not belong to man alone. Its wild creatures, mighty, majestic, and ancient, hold the land in ways humans can never understand. And as Helen sat there, unsure of her fate, she was being watched, not by humans, but by something far more magnificent. A lioness alone had noticed her from a distance. Her sharp eyes caught a strange vulnerability in the air, a faint scent of fear and weakness. This would be no ordinary day. The leopards, the lions, the very wind that howled across the plains, it would all soon show her that mercy comes in unexpected forms, sometimes from the most unlikely places. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an intense heat over the savannah. Helen felt every inch of it, the blistering warmth seeping into her bones, weighing her down like an invisible force. Her body, frail from age and illness, felt like a burden. The chair beneath her, once a symbol of independence, now seemed like a cruel reminder of her helplessness. She had no idea how long she had been sitting there, abandoned. The sounds of the jeep had faded away into the distance, replaced only by the hum of the heat and the occasional rustle of the tall grass. The landscape around her stretched endlessly, barren and desolate, yet full of life, but not the kind of life she was familiar with. She tried to lift her head, but her muscles, slow and uncooperative, protested. The harsh sun pressed down on her forehead, and she closed her eyes, allowing the quiet to settle over her. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes from a place where humans have no place. The kind of silence that spoke of ancient things, of predators that watched from the shadows, waiting for their moment to strike. Helen's mind wandered, flickering in and out of clarity. She remembered moments from her past. Her son, James, as a child playing in the yard, his face full of joy. She remembered the smell of her old kitchen, the warmth of family dinners shared with laughter and love. And then there was Claire, the coldness in Claire's eyes, the way she never seemed to truly care even when she visited. But no matter how she tried, Helen couldn't make sense of the present. All she knew was that she was alone, forgotten in a vast land where human kindness was a distant memory. But even as she sat there, her hand resting on her lap, something shifted in the air. A subtle change in the atmosphere, like a whisper carried by the wind. She didn't hear it, but she felt it. It was a presence. The air felt different, as though it were alive, watching her. Helen turned her head slowly, her eyes barely opening. And there it was, a flash of golden fur in the distance, just outside the periphery of her vision. A lioness, a magnificent creature, stood at the edge of the tall grass, her eyes locked on Helen's. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Two creatures, one old and fragile, the other young and fierce, locked in a silent understanding. Helen didn't know what to make of it. Her heart quickened, a mix of fear and awe stirring in her chest. But there was no panic, no frantic urge to scream or flee. It was as if, in that moment, her body had forgotten how to be afraid. She felt something else instead, a strange calmness, as if the savannah itself had momentarily embraced her. The lioness took a slow step forward, her movements graceful, deliberate. Helen's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't move. She couldn't. There was a kind of peace that had settled within her, one that defied everything she had ever known. As the lioness approached, Helen felt the weight of her frailty. She couldn't run, she couldn't even stand. The chair that had once been her comfort now felt like her prison. She looked down at her hands, gnarled and shaking, and then back up at the lioness. She wasn't sure what she expected, but she certainly didn't expect this. The lioness stopped in front of her, just a few feet away, her eyes never leaving Helen's. For a moment, they stood like that, as if time had stopped. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, the lioness sat down on the ground, her powerful frame settling into the dust. She tilted her head, observing Helen with the kind of patient gaze only a predator could have. It was then that Helen realized something that made her heart race, not with fear but with wonder. She wasn't alone, not in the way she had thought. As the lioness sat before her, Helen could hardly believe what was happening. The heat of the savannah still bore down on her, and the world felt as though it was spinning in a strange, surreal way. She was aware of the wild beauty surrounding her, of the vast, untamed land stretching beyond the horizon, but nothing seemed to matter. Not the blazing sun, not the dryness of her throat, not the pain in her joints. For the first time in a long while, she felt an unexpected connection to something larger than herself. The lioness, with her golden fur and powerful body, exuded an elegance and strength that Helen could never have imagined. She had seen lions in zoos, in documentaries on the television, but nothing could compare to the real thing. There was something almost sacred in the way the lioness held her gaze, the quiet intensity in those amber eyes. It was as if she saw right through Helen, through all the years, the confusion, the abandonment, and recognized something deeper. Helen, still trembling, reached out a hand toward the lioness. Her fingers hovered in the air, not sure of what to expect. She had always been a woman of warmth, of touch, and of love. She had raised her children with that same tenderness, even when life had been hard. But now, here in the savannah, with her mind clouded by Alzheimer's and her body weak, the touch she longed for was not from a human being. It came from the creature before her. With a soft, almost imperceptible movement, the lioness lowered her head, as though offering herself to Helen. The air was still, filled only with the rustling of distant grass and the steady pulse of the land. Slowly, Helen's hand descended, trembling, and brushed against the lioness's tawny fur. The warmth was like a gentle wave, a reassurance that made Helen's heart ache with a tenderness she hadn't felt in years. The lioness didn't pull away. Instead, she sat motionless, allowing Helen to touch her, as if they were both sharing in this moment, this fragile, unexpected moment of peace. For a while, time seemed to stretch and warp. Helen closed her eyes, her mind slipping in and out of awareness, but the feeling of the lioness's soft fur under her fingertips anchored her. The world around her was a blur, but in this small, quiet space, she felt like she belonged. She wasn't abandoned. Not by the land, not by the lions, and not by the universe itself. There was something profound in this connection, something ancient, a reminder that there were still forces of goodness and protection in the world, even when it seemed so absent. The lioness, however, was not alone. From the tall grasses surrounding them, other figures began to emerge. One by one, 6 more lionesses padded silently into view, their eyes scanning the surroundings, their movements smooth and fluid. They gathered in a protective circle around Helen, each one exuding a quiet strength and grace that Helen could feel deep in her bones. The powerful matriarch, who had first approached Helen, continued to sit motionless, her gaze never leaving the old woman's face. She seemed to be watching, as though ensuring that no harm would come to her. The others joined in, each lioness taking up a position around the wheelchair, forming an unspoken barrier between Helen and the vast savannah. Helen felt a strange comfort wash over her, as though these creatures, these magnificent beasts, were somehow her protectors. They weren't predators here. They were guardians, each one aware of her vulnerability, and each one choosing to stand watch over her. And then, as if the savannah itself had decided to offer her a gift, the giant lion, the leader of the pride, appeared. He was magnificent, taller and broader than any animal Helen had ever seen. His golden mane rippled in the wind, his large paws moving with silent authority. He was the king of the savannah, and his presence alone commanded the very air around him to still. He didn't move toward Helen right away. Instead, he stood at a distance, watching her with an expression that was both regal and knowing. His amber eyes, deep and wise, studied her, as though seeing her for who she truly was, her frailty, her strength, her humanity. The lioness, still seated at Helen's side, glanced up at him, acknowledging his presence. The lion's gaze shifted to the rest of the pride, his eyes flickering over the lionesses that encircled Helen. Then, in a slow, measured pace, he walked forward, each step purposeful and silent until he stopped just a few feet from her. Helen looked up at him in awe, her breath catching in her throat. His size was overwhelming, but it wasn't just his physicality that left her breathless. It was the way he seemed to embody everything that the savannah stood for: strength, wisdom, protection. And in that moment, Helen knew that this was no ordinary encounter. She was not just an old woman in a wheelchair. She was being witnessed by something far greater than herself. The lion lowered his head slightly, as if acknowledging her presence, and then, in an unexpected move, he laid down on the ground near her feet, his enormous frame sinking into the earth. His massive head rested on the dusty soil, and for a moment Helen could almost feel the earth pulse beneath them both. She reached out a hand, trembling, and as her fingers brushed against his golden mane, she realized something truly miraculous was happening. She wasn't alone, she wasn't abandoned. The savannah had accepted her, and in a way it had chosen to protect her. Not because she was deserving, but because in this moment, the land itself had recognized the fragile humanity in her, and had chosen to stand by her. As Helen sat there, surrounded by these magnificent creatures, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace that she hadn't known for years. It was a reminder that sometimes we find comfort and protection in the most unexpected places. And I want to hear from you. What's something in your life that brought you peace when you least expected it? I'd love for you to share your thoughts with me in the comments below. You know, we're all in this together. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, because I truly believe you're going to want to follow along on this journey with us. You're a part of this story now, and I can't wait to continue sharing these moments with you. The air grew cooler as the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon. The once intense heat of midday softened into the warm embrace of twilight. Helen's eyes, still fixed on the lion's majestic figure, felt heavier with each passing minute. The overwhelming sense of peace that had settled over her began to feel like a blanket, warm and comforting. She no longer felt the desperation that had come with being abandoned. Instead, she felt a strange sense of belonging, as if the savannah had accepted her as one of its own. The lion remained close by, his massive body stretched out on the earth, his eyes still locked on hers. His presence was powerful, but it wasn't threatening. There was no hunger in those amber depths, no predatory gleam that Helen had once feared. There was only calm. There was only understanding. And then, from the periphery of the savannah, Joseph, the park ranger, appeared in the distance. He had been alerted to the situation by the radio, his suspicion growing with every passing minute as he made his way toward the coordinates where Claire had supposedly abandoned Helen. But even Joseph, with all his experience, could not have prepared himself for the sight that awaited him. As he approached, his jeep moving slowly through the tall grass, he saw the circle of lionesses first. They were still there, each one maintaining their silent vigil around Helen's wheelchair. The sight struck him like a bolt of lightning. This was not just an unusual moment. This was something extraordinary. It was as if the savannah itself had taken a stand. Joseph's heart raced. He stopped the jeep, unsure of what to do next. He'd seen lions in the wild before, but this was different. They were not in pursuit of prey, they weren't hunting, they were watching. And in that moment, Joseph realized that they were protecting. His eyes flicked over to the large male lion, still lying at Helen's feet. The lion raised his head slightly, his amber eyes locking onto Joseph's for the first time. Joseph swallowed hard. He had always heard stories, legends about lions protecting those in need, but he had never witnessed such a moment. The power, the grace, the sheer dignity of the creature before him. It was impossible to describe. The wind shifted slightly, bringing with it the scent of the earth, the animals, and something else. A tension in the air, a quiet urgency. Joseph could see Claire, still sitting tensely in the passenger seat, her hands gripping the edges of the jeep as she watched the scene unfold. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. But Joseph didn't turn to her. His focus remained solely on Helen and the lions. For a long moment, nothing moved. The only sounds were the distant rustle of the grass and the deep, steady breathing of the lions. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the lion stood. His massive body seemed to stretch upward, as though he were rising from the very earth itself. He gave Joseph one last lingering look before he slowly turned away, as if signaling that the moment was over. The lionesses followed suit, rising and stretching their powerful limbs. One by one they moved away, each of them casting a final glance at Helen before disappearing into the tall grass. The entire pride, it seemed, had chosen this moment to depart. Joseph remained still, unable to move, his eyes fixed on the spot where the lions had been. It was a moment that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He wasn't sure how to explain it, what had just happened, why it had happened, or what it meant. But he knew one thing for certain. The Savannah had given Helen something that no one else could have. It had given her protection when no one else was willing to. As he slowly approached Helen's wheelchair, he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what he would find, what kind of explanation Claire would give, or what would come next. But as he reached out to gently touch Helen's shoulder, she turned her head toward him, her face filled with a quiet peace. She was smiling, the faintest of smiles, as if she had been part of something far greater than any of them could understand. "Are you all right, Mum?" Joseph asked softly, his voice trembling ever so slightly. Helen nodded, her smile never wavering. "I'm fine," she whispered. "I've never been better." Joseph blinked, unsure of how to respond. There were no words that could explain this moment, no explanation that could justify what had just occurred. It was something beyond reason, beyond logic, something that no one would ever believe unless they had seen it with their own eyes. But Helen, with her peaceful smile, knew the truth. In the silence of the savannah, surrounded by creatures that had chosen to protect her, she had found something that even the fiercest predators in the world could not take away: her dignity, her humanity, and a bond with the wild that no one could ever understand. In the days that followed, the events of that afternoon in the savannah remained vivid in Joseph's mind. He couldn't shake the image of the old woman surrounded by lions, the raw, unspoken power that had passed between them. It had shaken him in ways he couldn't explain, and when he spoke to others about it, his words always felt inadequate. How could anyone understand what had happened out there? How could they comprehend the extraordinary kindness that had come from creatures that were supposed to be feared? But Joseph kept coming back to it, the way Helen's frail, aged hands had gently touched the mane of the great lion, and the way the lioness had watched over her with the care of a protector. In all his years as a park ranger, Joseph had never seen anything like it. He couldn't help but feel like he had witnessed something sacred. As for Helen, life continued in ways that were simpler, but no less profound. Her son, James, arrived soon after, having heard the shocking news of what had happened. He was relieved to find her alive, though deeply shaken by the truth of what had transpired. James had always thought he knew his mother, but the woman who had returned from Africa was different, a woman whose heart had been touched by something larger than her years, something that defied human understanding. She seemed lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted from her, and she spoke of the lions not with fear but with reverence. Her family had brought her back to the United States after the incident, but Helen had changed. She spoke less of her confusion, and more of the quiet moments of peace she had found in the savannah. Her Alzheimer's still affected her, of course, but there was a spark in her eyes, a knowing that she hadn't had before. Sometimes, when the sun was setting, she would sit by the window, staring out into the distance, as if she could still feel the warmth of the savannah sun on her face. And as for Claire, the woman who had abandoned her, the truth came out. She was questioned, of course, and the lies she had told were uncovered one by one. The authorities did what they had to do, and Claire's actions were exposed for what they truly were. But none of that mattered to Helen. For her, the most important thing was that in the end, she had been cared for, not by her own kind, but by the wild, untamed forces of nature. The very creatures that humans feared had shown her more kindness than anyone ever had. The lions had been her protectors, and in their company she had found solace. In a world that had forgotten her, the savannah had not. Joseph continued to visit the park, though he never spoke of the event again. He would see the pride from time to time, still watching over the land they had protected so fiercely, and sometimes just before the sun dipped below the horizon, he would swear that he saw the great lion pause, lift his head, and look out toward the distance. Maybe he was remembering, maybe he was waiting, but what Joseph knew, what he would never forget, was that in the heart of the savannah, amidst its wild and dangerous beauty, something pure had happened, something that transcended all the expectations of the world. The lion had protected her not out of instinct, but out of something far more sacred, and in the end, that was the greatest miracle of all.